So a lot of students asked, is it expensive to try to move to Japan? Cost of living higher in Japan?
I would think,
Mm.
I think in comparison to the US, and I think especially where it is you're from,
Mm.
it is not that expensive.
Mm.
I think it's the cost of living is expensive in Japan if you're working there because I think wages in a lot of places are a lot lower than what they would be. But if you are, say, like studying in Japan and maybe you're getting like familial support or you're getting like scholarship money from the U.S. and whatnot, I would say it's not so bad. And then of course it just depends on where you live. So I live in Tokyo, so that's probably the most expensive place to live, and it's expensive, but it's not as expensive as I thought. So it's a lot less expensive than maybe it's way cheaper than well, maybe not way cheaper, but it's cheaper than living in New York or LA or something. And those are the equivalent cities. It really just depends on where it is you live and sort of what your budget is. But I think generally I would actually say not really. It just depends on a lot of factors. So
I agree with that. Like, I think depends on where you live in Japan. Definitely, like in the United States too. Like, where do you live? Like some areas are more expensive than the others. So definitely, I agree with some parts are more expensive than others in that situation. Difference in people's courtesy as opposed to in love in America.
If by courtesy you meant maybe like friendliness.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because, my students are giving me this question now. I was like, what do you mean by courtesy?
Yeah, so if they mean by like friendliness, I would probably say again, it depends on where you live. People in Tokyo are not as, I guess, friendly. If you go maybe one of the like smaller but regional cities, like people from Osaka are very, very nice. People from the Kansai area are like
really,
it's like it's like almost the U.S. equivalent of like Southern hospitality. And then I don't even say people from Tokyo are completely rude. It's just I think it's not as bad. It's just not maybe as nice as maybe a lot of other places. Generally, though, I think it's pretty much more or less the same. Again, it really does depend on where it is that you live.
Right.
And then, because there's good and bad people wherever you go. So I can't really say that maybe Americans are nicer or Japanese people are nicer. Right. I think it's all about the same. It just depends on who it is that you meet.
I totally agree. Like, a lot of people think that one nationality is certain personality than the other, and I think those are just stereotype or generalization. Like, everywhere you go in the world there are great people and bad people, like people have a understanding of maybe people in Tokyo are super busy or super they're on their life and stuff, but still, like, they are people who probably, if you have connections or if you get to talk to them, like, they are super nice and stuff. But it's hard to tell like who's really nice and not, like, depends on who you meet.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever I'm back home, everyone's like, "Oh, I want to move to Japan so bad," because Japanese people are the nicest people ever. And I'm like, no, I don't know about that, but okay.
Yeah. Same thing, right? Same thing goes with Americans, right? People in Japan think that America is so cool. People in Americas are so cool. But I think it's, there are so many cool people, exactly. But at the same time, like, it's not everyone, you can't apply to everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope that helps answer that question at least somewhat.
Thank you. I think high schoolers really need to hear that, like, it's not like, even though I keep telling them, like, they don't trust me, the teacher talks.
They don't know. You're not going to know until you actually get confronted with an actual, like, just not good person. And but it's also, I think that that's the case for people who, like, they really want to go to a cool place, so they sort of like a place that they're really interested in, so they sort of like almost romanticize it in a sort of way. But Japan, Tokyo, where like every place is just a different place. So there's good and bad people in between and whatnot. So it's not really like you can say they're nice, they're cool.
Right.
Because Japanese people tell me, they're like, oh, you're American, you're so cool. And I'm like, why?
How hard is it to live in Japan, and how is the immersion?
I think actually, I was talking to one of my friends about this the other day. Living in Japan is actually very, very great. At least in Tokyo, I have had, even whenever I was here in university, it was, I had the absolute best time here. So much I wanted to come back. And even, even though we're in a pandemic, I'm still, I think, having a really good time here, regardless. Living here, obviously there's a lot of adjustments that you have to make, but I don't think that there are adjustments that, are fairly, difficult. It's just like, and I feel like this is true if not even in just Japan, but anywhere else. Like, you move to a completely foreign country, maybe you don't know anybody, you don't know anybody, you're not part of the culture, you don't really know the culture that well. And then so, you have to sort of learn things along the way. And then so that part is difficult, but it's also fun, So, like, I think I wouldn't say living in Japan, like, it can be, like, the things that would be hard is, like, maybe you don't have a good job, so either, your workplace, your job isn't, you have a bad work environment, or, you're not getting paid a lot. So, like, especially if you're in Tokyo, is, even though it's not as expensive as maybe like a lot of big cities in the States, it's still like a fairly expensive city to live in. So it's like, maybe you don't pay well. So like, it's small stuff like that I think is probably contribute to the difficulty of living here. But also I don't think it's necessarily hard. It's just like, some people are able to compatible with living here than others, I guess. So it really just depends on the person. So, I love living here. This is good for me, but, I do know some people who, they don't really like living here, but, they left their home countries for here because, they have better opportunities here, but they don't really, click. So,
what do you think it will make it the difference? The people who have easier time, and then easier time to transit, and then people who are not.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is really just like sort of personality wise, and maybe what it is that you've grown up like, what you're used to growing up with. So like, a few people that I know, they come from like Caribbean countries, and in Caribbean countries generally people are more direct. But, in Japan, people are not very direct when they speak or when they do things. So for them, it's kind of like a culture clash. So I think it's a lot of it is like culture clash. As with living in any other foreign country and like, making the jump to move there, you sort of have to be you have to be very solid in yourself, I guess, to make that choice and to like stick with it even whenever things are really difficult and really hard. And I think a lot of people who aren't very like, maybe they're not sure what they want to do entirely, like, while they're here, or and this isn't even a root way, like mental health problems. So like, I also have them, but then I have like a therapist that I talk to. And anytime, like, I'm a bit overwhelmed, like, she knows, and we talk about it, and it helps keep me, really level. But then even whenever I first came here, I was like, okay, I want to make sure that, like, mentally I'm very, like, at least somewhat solid to move here. And I know some people who may not have, had that, or who may not have had that or have that, they're having a very tough time living here because it's just a bit overwhelming. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it's totally to me. Since you mentioned about your mental, illness, and maybe I had a question from one of the students that specifically I have a question about that. Is there any support for people with mental illness in school? Medication easily accessible for those conditions? A therapist common in Japan? Is mental health covered in insurance? What is a public view on mental health issues? So if we can start with those, that would be great.
Yeah, I remember I saw that question and I told it to my friends. And I hate to say this to the students, but there really isn't A whole lot, if any. Mental health, like, for people with mental illnesses in school, or just in Japanese society in general. So I can go through the list. Is there any support for people with mental illnesses in school? I guess ultimately it would depend on the school, but generally not really. My school at Sophia, actually, because Sophia is one of probably like the most, like, I guess, like, progressive universities here in Japan. And, you know, in part of our orientation, I think that they had a section on, you know, maybe if you were depressed or something, like, you know, who you could go to. But I don't think it was that extensive. And most other universities don't have that. Like, that's not something that's common. Like, at my school back at home, because I'm from Tennessee, like, you know, you at least had mental health services. So, like, you know, in the States, like, you know, in American schools, like, you know, most schools have a mental health services office. May not always be good, but, you know, they have one. But, you know, here in Japanese schools, they don't have them like that.
I'm surprised.
So actually, the therapist I have is from the States, and I just Skype her like once every other week. Yeah.
So maybe that might be a good solution for some people that might need extra help that they might not be getting in Japan.
Yeah. And is medication easily accessible? No. So one thing that I did want to mention is that, you know, if most medications in the U.S. that deal with mental health are illegal in Japan. So you cannot get a whole lot of most antidepressants are illegal. If you take antipsychotics for whatever reason, those are illegal. Even ADHD drugs. So, like, if you have ADHD and maybe you take Adderall, that's illegal. I think even Ritalin is also illegal in Japan. They have, like, an offshoot version that's like a really, really low dose of whatever it is. Of whatever it is. It's like I think it's like an offshoot of Ritalin. Have that, but it's very, very low dose, and it's very difficult to get. It is not covered with insurance. You have to pay outright for those things. There are therapists here, but again, those aren't covered by national insurance. Same thing with medication. So, like, one of my friends, he has a therapist back in his home country, but, you know, he gets a prescription, you know, for his medicine. I don't even know what it is, but he gets prescription for his medicine from a psychiatrist here. But, you know, he had to up his dose, but it took a lot of work for that to happen. Even for a medication that, you know, back in his home country, you know, it was, you know, very easy to get. A therapist common in Japan? Actually, no. And that's one of the things that whenever you move here, you kind of do have to think about. I live in Tokyo because Tokyo has everything that you will ever need. And so that's why a lot of people end up flocking here, not even necessarily because it's just Tokyo, but because, like, there's a lot of things like services and stuff that, you know, are very easily to be able to find that you will probably not be able to find in most other places. Even like Osaka or something, or like Osaka, Nagoya, or something like that. Like, you can probably find them, but they're even less quantity.
And I wonder if your English ability too, like, I wonder it must be more harder to find someone that can speak Japanese and English fluently too. Because therapy itself is few.
Yeah, exactly. And then I know because in a lot of, you know, there's a lot of foreigner Facebook groups, which I don't know if your high schoolers use Facebook, because even people my age stopped using Facebook like that. But Facebook is great for, you know, groups like that. It's probably the only reason why I go on there. And, you know, say if they're thinking about going, that they should make an account and join those groups, because, you know, it's actual people who have lived here and, you know, have lived here for years. And, you know, you can pretty much find any question. Like, if there's a problem, like, if you just don't know how to do something, you can search those groups and you can find a question within those groups, because somebody who's new to Japan and had moved there has already asked that question. And one of the questions I had looked up was, like, whenever I first got here, you know, the first time was, you know, mental health services. And, you know, everyone pretty much told me, they were like, you're kind of out of luck for this. Like, there's therapists here, but they're very expensive. And to be frank, a lot of them are not good. There's a couple of them that a lot of people have said to clearly stay away from because they're not like helpful. So there's that.
It seems like in America it's so common, even in a high school or probably in the middle school too, like at least one person at school that students can go talk to, psychologists, that it's really, I think it's a lot of people are more open to like go see a therapist, definitely in the States. So I think it's still, I heard that it's getting a little bit more Japanese people to go to the therapist, but still compared to what we have in the States, I don't think it's the same equivalence of openness when it comes to see the therapist.
Yeah, for real. And that last question, what is the public view on mental health issues? The public view, I think, in Japan, generally speaking, of mental health issues is that you don't talk about it if you have that problem. It's kind of like a burden on, it's kind of like, if you talk about it, you're burdening the other people. Like, it's like, like some of my friends who I met while they were actually studying at my university in the U.S., like, and that was the first time that they had, because they went to the mental health services at our school one time, and they gave them advice, like, about family and stuff like that. And like a couple of my friends, they told their family, like, oh, I'm depressed, or I have anxiety or something. Their family was like, why would you put this on me? Like, and there's this sort of idea that, if you have like mental health problems of any, then, they think you're going to like shoot up a school or something. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, if you say, oh, I'm depressed, they're going to be like, well, what are you, like, that makes people, like, a lot of, not all people, but like, a lot of people, like, they're like, they think that's the equivalent of you being just like crazy or something, instead of like, you have a problem. And you're right, it is getting a lot better over time, but it's still like, in the U.S., mental health awareness and education treatments, like, it's getting better. It's not great, but, say if like, the U.S. is probably like, if we're on a scale, the U.S. is like, it's like this big. U.S. is like probably like right here. Japan is all the way over here. So you're gonna have the public view on mental health issues is very sensitive with people. But for younger people are the ones who are like sort of trying to change that. So you're more likely, maybe if you talk about it with somebody that is like, closer to your age, like, who's younger, they could probably understand you better than maybe if you talk to someone older. And then, older people are also somewhat aware, but, it's kind of like one of those things you just kind of, it's taboo. You don't really talk about it, if you have one.
Right. Because I see a couple of people posting their ADHD and how they are living in Japan and stuff in the YouTube, Japanese person. So I was really surprised to see that some people are really open about it nowadays. But you, like you mentioned, I think it's a lot to go when it comes to be aware in the society wise. But I hope a lot of people will get more help, because I feel like if there are more therapists available in Japan, I think, more Japanese people can be open about it, and it will have easier time, communicate with others, not looked at like, like, should I talk about this? Or, like, I don't want to be, in trouble, but, just be more open and help each other so that, we all can have happy life in Japan. And I feel like it's something that a lot of people in Clubhouse seems like they are talking about it too, that, people in Japan are aware of that problems, yet a lot of people don't know how to change it, seems like, especially the older generation people. So
yeah, that's really good. And I think I would say in general, for a lot of the things that, my Japanese friends, who've been to either the US or Europe or somewhere, they say this, and I would probably have to agree, is that, at least maybe things in the US aren't, they're not perfect. Well, and I could say they're not great in a lot of ways, but at least, things like this are more openly accepted to talk about. Like, you can talk about, like, oh, I feel like this, I feel like this, just any sort of topic, like, that is an issue that needs to be like, you know, addressed or raised in the US. Like, you know, it's more acceptable, and it's because a lot of, you know, people put a lot of work in, you know, to make it more acceptable to talk about a lot of things. And in Japan, you know, you really don't talk, like, they don't talk about these things quite as openly. You know, talking about you that you're depressed, you kind of have to watch who you tell that you're depressed. Because I've heard of people, like, you know, somebody told somebody that, you know, that they were told, maybe a coworker or something, that they were depressed. And then, you know, they were like afraid of them afterwards because they don't know really well, actually they know what depression is, but it's like, you know, why are you talking about this? Like, it's very like hush,
right,
sort of thing. And so it's very, someone who's from the US and being American, like, you know, you talking about things, and it's like, you know, now it's like, wow, I have to watch what it is that I say, like, regarding myself, and it's kind of weird.
Yeah, and especially with the COVID right now, you know, a lot of students are going through a lot of things with the distance learning. So definitely, you know, it's not enough. Like, even in America, you know, we say we have a therapist and we have psychologists at school, but definitely not enough to support the students that we have right now that are going through a lot of difficulties. So in Japan, it's a little bit, you know, less with the distance learning and all that in education, but I'm sure, you know, there are a lot of people in need. But hopefully it will be solved soon, you know, one step at a time, hopefully.
Yeah, let's hope so. Fingers crossed.
Definitely, fingers crossed.